Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vos Kari, and stared at the empty patch of space on his main screen. Nothing was there. No ship, no signal, no heat trace, just black space and cold stars. Yet every sensor operator on his bridge told him the same thing. Something had passed through this sector only hours ago, and it had killed 400 of his soldiers while doing it. "Show me the wreckage again," Threx said. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man who had commanded fleets for 30 cycles and had never lost this badly before. The screen changed. It showed the broken remains of the supply cruiser Halvanar, its hull torn open like paper, its reactor core missing entirely, not destroyed but removed, cut out with surgical precision and taken away. There were no boarding marks, no breach points, no sign of how anyone had gotten inside a ship that was, at the time of the attack, surrounded by 6 escort vessels. "This is the 9th ship in 4 months, said Fleet Commander Yashira Dole, standing at his side. She was younger than Threx, sharp-eyed, and she did not like what she was seeing, any more than he did. Always the same pattern. No warning, no battle. The ship is there one moment, and then it is gone, and something valuable has been taken with it. "The humans call it a ghost ship," Threx said. "Our own soldiers have started calling it the Darkship. They say it is not truly a machine at all, but a demon that hunts in the space between stars." "Superstition," Yashira said. "Perhaps," Threx answered. "But even I have started to wonder how a single vessel can do this to an empire of 10,000 worlds and not be seen even once." He was not wrong to wonder. The Sol Federation, what the humans called their small alliance of colonized worlds, had been at war with the Kesserine Dominion for 6 years. It was a war the humans should have lost in the first month. The Dominion had more ships, more soldiers, more worlds, more of everything that mattered in a war between stars. Human colonies fell one after another in the early days. Entire star systems changed hands within a single cycle of the Dominion calendar. But then the losses had slowed, then they had stopped, and then, quietly, without any grand battle or turning point that historians could point to, the Dominion began to lose ships in places where no enemy fleet should have been. Scout vessels vanished on the edges of Dominion space. Weapons depots exploded with no attacker in sight. And worst of all, intelligence that should have been perfectly secure began leaking out, as if someone inside the Dominion's own command structure was passing secrets directly to Earth. The Dominion Council had ordered an investigation. The investigation found spies, interrogated them, executed them, and the leaks continued anyway. That was when the rumors of the Darkship began. A ship, human-built, that could not be detected by any sensor the Dominion possessed. A ship that could walk among Dominion fleets unseen, listen to their command channels, steal their fuel and their weapons and their secrets, and vanish before anyone knew it had been there at all. Threx did not believe in ghosts. He was a soldier of the Dominion, trained in the old ways, and he believed in armor plating and engine output, and the strength of a well-drilled crew. But 9 ships in 4 months was not something he could explain with normal military logic, and that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. "I want every ship in this fleet rescanned," he said. "Every cargo hold, every maintenance shaft, every place a person could hide." "Admiral, we scanned the entire fleet 3 weeks ago," Yashira said. "Nothing was found." "Then we will scan it again," Threx said. "And if we find nothing again, we will scan it a 3rd time. I will not lose another ship to something I cannot see." Far below the bridge of the Vos Kari, in a maintenance corridor that had not been inspected in over a year because the automated systems had marked it as low priority, a section of wall that looked exactly like every other section of wall shimmered for half a second and then opened. Commander Elena Voss stepped out of the hidden compartment and closed it behind her. The wall sealed shut, and within 2 seconds it looked, to any eye or sensor, precisely like the metal around it. She checked her wrist display. The Dominion's 3rd security sweep in 3 weeks had just been announced over their internal comm channels, which her ship had been quietly listening to for the entire 6 years of this war. She smiled to herself. They still had not found her. Elena was 34 years old, born on Earth in the years before the war, trained in the Federation's Deep Intelligence Corps, and for the last 4 years she had served as the captain of a ship that officially did not exist. The Federation called it the Nightfall Project. Her own crew, in quieter moments, had taken to calling their ship the same thing the enemy called it, the Darkship. It was not an official name, but it had a certain honesty to it that Elena liked. Her ship, the ANS Wraith, was not large. It carried a crew of only 22, small enough to fit inside a single deck of an ordinary Dominion cruiser, which was exactly the point. It was not built to fight fleets. It was not built to conquer worlds. It was built to do one thing better than any vessel ever constructed by human hands: disappear. The Wraith's hull was covered in an experimental material developed in the last desperate years of early Federation research, a material that absorbed nearly every form of energy a sensor could throw at it, and bent the little that it could not absorb around itself, instead of reflecting it back. To radar, to LiDAR, to gravitic sensors, to the strange sniffing instruments the Dominion used to detect ship exhaust, the Wraith simply was not there. It cast no shadow that any machine could see. Its heat signature was collected and stored rather than vented, then released slowly, over days, in tiny amounts too small to register as anything but background noise. And 6 months ago, on a mission that Elena still sometimes could not quite believe had worked, the Wraith had done the boldest thing any Federation ship had ever attempted. It had followed Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn's main battle fleet as it left dock, matched its course precisely, and slipped into formation among the support and supply vessels traveling with it. Then, in the chaos of a routine fleet reorganization 3 days later, the Wraith had used the confusion to physically dock itself inside the empty cargo bay of an old troop transport ship that the Dominion had stopped using for actual troops, and instead used to haul spare parts. It had been hiding there ever since, inside the belly of the Dominion's own main fleet, traveling everywhere they traveled, listening to everything they said. "Report," Elena said, walking onto the bridge of the Wraith, which was really only a single room, the size of a large office, crowded with screens and crew stations. "Same as always, Captain," said Lieutenant Marcus Ubi, her sensors officer, a broad-shouldered man from the Ganymede colonies who had a gift for reading Dominion communication patterns that bordered on the supernatural. They're rattled. Threx ordered a third sweep of the fleet. Command staff still thinks the attacks are coming from outside, hit-and-run raids by a stealth ship they can't catch. "Because that's what we want them to think," Elena said. "Right. But Captain, some of the junior officers are starting to whisper something different. A couple of the maintenance crews on the transport we're docked in have started saying there's something wrong with this specific ship. Nothing they can prove. Just a feeling." Elena felt a small knot form in her stomach. A feeling was how every discovery started. She had studied every case in history of hidden things being found, and it was never the sensors that caught them first. It was always a person. A feeling that something was not right, followed by curiosity, followed by someone looking a little too closely at the wrong place at the wrong time. "How close is the next sweep?" she asked. 6 hours, said her engineer, Chief Petty Officer Dae-Jung Park, without looking up from his console. He was a small, quiet man who had built half the Wraith's stealth systems with his own hands back on Earth, and he treated every scan the Dominion ran against them like a personal insult. "Don't worry, Captain. Same as the last two. They won't find anything. My systems are clean." "Your systems have kept us alive for 6 months inside their own fleet," Elena said. "I trust them. But trust and carelessness are not the same thing. I want a full internal check before that sweep. Every system, no exceptions." "Aye, Captain." Elena walked to the center of the bridge and looked at the main display, which showed a simplified diagram of Grand Admiral Threx's entire battle fleet, 41 ships strong, spread out in a defensive formation as they traveled toward what Dominion Command was calling a routine border patrol. Elena knew better. She had read the encrypted orders 3 days ago. Orders meant only for fleet command eyes. Orders that the Wraith's listening systems had quietly copied without anyone in the Dominion ever knowing. This was not a routine patrol. This fleet was moving toward the Threll Corridor, the single most important supply route connecting the Dominion's core worlds to its outer warfronts. And in 11 days, at a specific set of coordinates inside that corridor, the fleet was going to rendezvous with 3 additional battle groups to form something the Dominion had never assembled before in this war. A single combined strike force of over 130 warships, intended to end the war in one overwhelming blow against the last defended Federation colonies. If that fleet reached its destination and combined with the others, the Federation would not survive what came next. Elena had run the numbers herself, more than once, hoping each time she would find a mistake. She never did. She had known this mission would eventually come to something like this. 6 months of quiet listening, quiet theft, quiet sabotage, all of it building toward a moment where the information she carried would matter more than any single battle ever could. She just had not expected that moment to arrive, wrapped in something this dangerous. "Marcus," she said, "get me a secure line to Federation Command. Priority 1. They need to see what I'm seeing." "Captain, a transmission of that size, that encrypted, from inside a Dominion fleet. If there's any chance at all it gets caught." "I know the risk," Elena said. "Send it anyway. If this fleet reaches the Threll corridor and links up with the others, there won't be a Federation left to warn." Marcus nodded and turned back to his console, his fingers moving fast over controls that had been custom-built to disguise any outgoing signal as random background static, the kind Dominion systems were trained to ignore entirely. It would take nearly 4 hours to send the full data package, using a signal weak enough to avoid detection. 4 hours in which the Wraith would have to sit perfectly still, perfectly quiet, doing nothing that might draw attention, while a security sweep counted down somewhere above them. Elena looked around her small bridge at her crew, people she had lived beside in cramped quarters for 6 months, hidden inside enemy territory, trusting each other with their lives every single day. None of them looked frightened, they looked focused. That was the thing about the crew of the Wraith that Elena was proudest of. Fear did not disappear when you did dangerous work long enough. It simply learned to sit quietly in the corner of the room, while everyone kept working. "Dae-jung," she said. "How long until the internal check is finished?" 90 minutes, Captain. Do it faster if you can. I have a feeling we're going to need every one of those 6 hours to go exactly right." She did not know yet how right she was. 6 hours away, on the bridge of the Voskari, Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn was reviewing a report from one of his junior engineers, a report about strange, faint power fluctuations detected inside the cargo hold of an old parts transport ship traveling with the fleet. The kind of fluctuation, the engineer noted, that a normal ship system should not produce. Threx read the report twice. Then he set it aside and called for his chief of security. "I want that transport ship inspected personally," he said. "Not by automated systems. By a person, with their own eyes, walking through every corridor of that ship before the next sweep begins." Somewhere between the Wraith's hiding place and the bridge where Threx gave that order, 6 hours had just become a much shorter amount of time than Elena Voss believed she had. To understand why a single small ship mattered so much to an empire of 10,000 worlds, it helped to understand how the war had actually begun, a story that every officer on both sides knew by heart, though each side told it differently. The Kesserine Dominion had existed for over 800 years before humanity ever built its first working starship engine. It had grown slowly, the way old empires grow, absorbing weaker species through conquest or persuasion, building a government that stretched across thousands of star systems, governed by a council of 9 grand houses that answered to no one but themselves. By the time Dominion scout ships first detected the faint radio signals leaking outward from Earth, the Empire had already fought and won 11 major wars against other spacefaring species. None of those wars had lasted more than 2 years. None of those enemies had ever managed to do more than delay the inevitable outcome. The Dominion's first contact with humanity had not gone well. A scout vessel investigating the signal source had been detected by Earth's primitive early warning satellites, and the resulting diplomatic confusion, worsened by translation errors and mutual suspicion on both sides, had spiraled within 18 months into open war. The Dominion Council, confident in 8 centuries of unbroken military success, had expected the conflict to end the same way all their previous wars had ended, quickly and in their favor. For the first year, it looked as though they were right. Human colonies on Mars and in the Jovian system fell within months. Earth's own orbital defenses, advanced by human standards but primitive compared to Dominion technology, were overwhelmed in a series of battles that cost the Dominion almost nothing in return. By the end of that first year, military analysts across a dozen allied Dominion worlds were already drafting reports on how the newly conquered human systems would be administered. Then something changed. and to this day, the Dominion's own historians could not fully explain what. Human engineers, working in secret facilities, scattered across the remaining unconquered colonies, had begun producing technology that should not have been possible, given how young their spacefaring civilization was. Some of it was clumsy and desperate, built from whatever materials were available, the kind of technology that worked exactly once before failing completely. But some of it was brilliant, in ways that unsettled Dominion strategists far more than any single weapon could have. Humans, it turned out, had a peculiar gift for solving problems sideways, for building things that did not follow the expected path from one generation of technology to the next, but instead leapt toward solutions that a species with 800 years of steady, careful progress had simply never thought to try. The Wraith, and the stealth technology behind it, was the purest example of that gift. Dominion cloaking technology, developed over centuries, worked by actively canceling detectable signatures, a brute force approach that required enormous power and was never fully perfect. Human researchers, starting from almost nothing and working under the crushing pressure of a war they were losing, had instead built a passive system that simply refused to produce a signature in the first place, absorbing energy instead of hiding it. It was a different way of thinking about the same problem, and it was, as far as anyone in either the Dominion or the Federation knew, still a technology that existed on only one ship in the entire galaxy. Threx Kalorn had studied every report on the war's turning point that Dominion intelligence had ever produced, and he had come away from all of them with the same uneasy conclusion. Humanity had not won any single battle that mattered. What they had done, instead, was make every subsequent battle cost the Dominion more than the last, patiently, relentlessly, until even an empire of 10,000 worlds began to feel the weight of a war it had once assumed would be over in a season. It was that pattern, more than any specific ship or weapon, that worried him most. Back on the bridge of the Voskari, Threx watched the security shuttle depart toward KVN 771 and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection before turning back to the mountain of reports waiting on his console. Fleet Commander Yashira Dole remained at his side, watching the same departing shuttle with an expression that mixed doubt and curiosity in equal measure. "You truly believe there is something aboard that specific transport?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I believe the pattern of losses over the last 6 months points toward a vessel operating from somewhere close and consistent, rather than a raider striking from outside our formations," Threx said. "Every attack has occurred against ships that were, at the time, traveling as part of this fleet's supporting elements. Not against isolated vessels, not against patrol craft operating far from the main body, always against something close to us. That is not the pattern of a hunter circling from outside. That is the pattern of something living among the herd." Yashira considered this. "If you are right, and something has been hiding inside our own formation for months, undetected by every sensor sweep we have run, then the Federation possesses technology that we do not understand and cannot currently counter. That is a troubling thought for a Grand Admiral to hold quietly to himself." "It is a troubling thought, regardless of who holds it," Threx said, "which is exactly why I have not yet reported my full suspicions to the Council. A theory without proof, especially a theory this uncomfortable, will not be well received by men who have spent their careers believing the Dominion's technological superiority to be beyond question. I need proof, Commander, or I need to eliminate the possibility entirely. Either outcome is better than uncertainty. And if Sub-Commander Petch finds nothing today, then I will look again tomorrow, and the day after, for as long as it takes," Threx said. "I did not survive 30 cycles of command by ignoring patterns simply because they were inconvenient to believe." He turned his attention back to the star charts displayed across his primary console, where the projected course of his fleet toward the Threll corridor traced a slow, deliberate line across Dominion space. In 11 days, this fleet would combine with 3 others to form the largest strike force the Dominion had assembled in this entire war, a force built specifically to end the conflict once and for all, before the Federation's strange, sideways gift for invention could produce some new surprise capable of prolonging the war for years the Dominion no longer wished to spend. He did not yet know how close that surprise already was, sitting quietly in the dark, 20 meters beneath the deck plating of a ship he had already ordered searched twice. The order moved fast through the Dominion fleet, the way orders from a Grand Admiral always did. Within 20 minutes, a security team of 6 soldiers, led by a hard-faced officer named Sub-Commander Ural Petch, boarded a shuttle and crossed the short distance between the Vos Kari and the old parts transport ship, known simply by its registry number, KVN 771. Inside the cargo hold of KVN 771, hidden behind a wall of stacked spare engine parts that Daejung Park had carefully arranged over the last 6 months to look exactly like ordinary storage clutter, the Wraith sat in complete silence. Its stealth hull was active. Its power output was reduced to the barest minimum needed to keep life support running. Every light on the ship had been dimmed. Every crew member not actively working had been told to move slowly, speak softly, and avoid anything that might create a vibration or a sound that could travel through the hull. Elena stood at her sensor station, watching a feed pulled quietly from KVN 771's own internal security cameras, a feed her systems had been secretly tapping since the day they arrived. She watched the security shuttle dock. She watched 6 armed Dominion soldiers walk down the transport's main corridor. "They're not doing a standard sweep," Marcus said quietly, watching the same feed. "Standard sweeps use handheld scanners and take maybe 20 minutes. This is a physical walkthrough." Someone told them to actually look. "Someone's suspicious," Elena said. "The question is how suspicious," said her second officer, Lieutenant Commander Priya Nasser, a calm, methodical woman who had served with Elena since the very first mission of the Wraith program. "If it's just a routine order following the pattern of attacks, they'll walk through, see nothing, and leave. If someone flagged this specific ship for a specific reason, they'll look harder." Elena watched the security feed. The 6 soldiers moved through the transport's corridors with the unhurried confidence of men who did not expect to find anything, checking storage compartments, running scanners over walls, opening supply crates. It looked, for the first 10 minutes, exactly like the kind of search that would find nothing and leave. Then Sub-Commander Petch stopped walking. He was standing near the entrance to the cargo hold where the Wraith was hidden, and he was looking at his handheld scanner with a frown. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice tight, "he's got a reading." "What kind of reading?" "Power fluctuation. Small. The kind our systems are supposed to mask completely, but..." Marcus checked his own console, and his frown deepened. "Daejung, did you run a diagnostic pulse in the last 10 minutes?" "No," Daejung said immediately, already moving to his engineering console. "I finished the internal check 20 minutes ago. Everything was clean. Nothing should be pulsing." "Something is," Marcus said, "a small one. Faint. But it's there, and it's coming from somewhere close to us." Elena's mind moved fast, running through possibilities. A malfunction was possible but unlikely, given how carefully Daejung maintained every system on the ship. A sensor error on the Dominion side was possible, and would explain why the reading was so faint that it had taken a physical search to notice it, instead of an automated scan. But there was a third possibility that worried her more than the other 2. "Could it be external?" she asked. "Something from another part of this ship, not from us at all?" Daejung's fingers moved fast over his console. Checking. "Yes, Captain, I think I found it. There's an old auxiliary power relay in the wall behind our hiding spot, part of the transport's original systems, decades old. It's been slowly failing for who knows how long. It's producing tiny power spikes on its own, nothing to do with us." Relief moved through Elena's chest, but only part way. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without shutting it down myself, which I obviously can't do right now." On the security feed, Sub-Commander Petch was still standing near the cargo hold entrance, scanner in hand, frowning at whatever reading he was seeing. One of his soldiers said something to him that the feed's audio did not pick up clearly, and Petch shook his head slowly, the universal gesture of a man who was not quite satisfied, but also could not point to anything specific. "He's going to call it in," Priya said quietly, "or he's going to search the hold itself." Elena watched the small figure on her screen make his decision. After a long moment, Petch put his scanner away and gestured for his team to move on to the next section of the ship, continuing down the corridor without entering the cargo hold at all. The bridge of the Wraith let out a collective breath that nobody had realized they were holding. "That was close," Marcus said. "Too close," Elena said. "Daejung, the moment this sweep is finished and that team is off the ship, I want that old relay isolated or shut down completely. I don't care if it's not technically our system. If it's producing readings that draw attention to our hiding spot, it's a problem. Understood, Captain. They watched the rest of the search play out over the next 40 minutes. The security team moved through every remaining section of KVN 771, found nothing else of interest, and returned to their shuttle. Subcommander Petch filed a report noting a minor unresolved power anomaly, consistent with the age of the vessel's systems, recommended it for maintenance at the next dock, and closed the investigation. It was, by any reasonable measure, a success. The Wraith remained hidden. The mission continued. But Elena did not feel the relief she thought she should feel. She sat in her captain's chair for a long moment after the security shuttle had undocked and pulled away, thinking about how close that had been, and about how much closer things could still get. "Marcus," she said. "Status on the data transmission to Federation Command?" "Still running, Captain. We're at 60%. Should complete in about 90 minutes if we don't have to go dark again." "We can't afford to go dark," Elena said. "Not with what's in that data. Keep it running unless we have no other choice." She stood and walked to the small viewport at the front of the bridge, one of the only true windows on the entire ship, usually kept covered by an armored shutter to avoid any light escaping that might be detected from outside. Right now the shutter was closed, and all she could see was her own reflection in the dark metal. 6 months. 6 months of living inside the belly of the enemy that had killed her sister's entire colony in the second year of the war, the enemy that had burned 3 of Earth's oldest off-world settlements to ash, the enemy she had once sworn, in the private and furious way that grieving people swear things, that she would make pay for every life it had taken. She had not expected revenge to look like this. She had not expected it to feel like sitting quietly in the dark for months at a time, listening, waiting, doing almost nothing that felt like fighting at all. But she understood, better than most, that this was exactly the kind of fighting that could end a war. Not one dramatic battle. 1,000 small, quiet moments where information moved from one side to the other, where supply lines were disrupted just enough to matter, where an enemy fleet's confidence was worn down piece by a threat they could never quite prove existed. "Captain," Priya said, breaking her thoughts. "I think you should see this." Elena turned back to the bridge. Priya had pulled up a new feed, this one from the Voskari's internal communications, decrypted by systems that Daejung had spent the better part of a year perfecting before the Wraith had even left Earth. It showed a transcript, scrolling in real time, of a private conversation between Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn and Fleet Commander Yashira Dole. "Not satisfied with Petch's report," Threx was saying, according to the transcript. "It is an excuse for not finding an answer. You believe the Darkship is aboard KVN 771 specifically," Yashira said. "I believe nothing yet," Threx replied. "But I have learned, across 30 cycles of command, that mysteries rarely resolve themselves in the direction of nothing. I want that transport ship watched, quietly. No further physical searches that might tip off whoever or whatever is causing these readings, if anyone is there at all. Just watched. And if nothing happens, then in 1 cycle's time, we search it again, more thoroughly. And if something does happen, if we lose another ship, if another leak appears, if that anomaly reading grows instead of fading, then we will know we were right to be suspicious, and I will burn that transport to ash myself before I let it slip through our fingers." Elena read the transcript twice, and a cold, careful feeling settled over her. "He suspects us," she said quietly, "not confirmed, but suspects." "What do we do?" Marcus asked. Elena thought for a long moment. The mission was not finished. The data transmission was not complete. And in 11 days, this fleet would still reach the Threll corridor and combine with the others into a force that could end the Federation, unless something changed between now and then. Pulling out now, abandoning the mission because of one close call, would mean 6 months of careful, dangerous work, accomplishing nothing when it mattered most. But staying, with a suspicious Grand Admiral now quietly watching this exact ship, was its own kind of danger. "We finished the transmission," Elena said finally. "We stay dark as long as we can, and we start preparing for the possibility that we may not be able to simply hide our way out of this one." She looked around at her crew, each of them watching her, waiting. "If Threx Kalorn is starting to believe in ghosts, then it's time we start thinking about what we do when a ghost finally gets caught looking back." Nobody on the bridge said anything for a long moment. Then Dae-jung spoke, quietly, from his engineering station. "Captain, if it comes to that, I want it on record that I built a few surprises into this ship that we've never had to use yet. Nothing that breaks our cover. But if the day comes that we can't hide anymore, we won't be defenseless. Not even against 130 warships." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in hours, something that was almost a smile crossed her face. "Good," she said, "because I have a feeling we're going to need it." Above them, unseen and unaware of exactly how close the enemy's suspicion had crept, Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn stood on the bridge of the Voskari, staring at the same stretch of empty space he had stared at hours earlier, still certain that something was watching him from somewhere he could not see, and utterly unaware that he was, in fact, entirely correct. That night, if night meant anything aboard a ship that never saw a true sunrise or sunset, Elena found herself unable to sleep. She left her small quarters and walked the short length of the Wraith's single-crew corridor until she reached the tiny galley, where she found Dae-jung Park sitting alone, a cup of recycled coffee in his hands, staring at nothing in particular. "Couldn't sleep either," she said, not quite a question, and sat down across from him. "I keep running the numbers on that relay," Dae-jung said. "The one Petch's scanner picked up. I told everyone it was an old system fault, unrelated to us, and I believe that's true. But I keep thinking about how close it came to being something worse. One more coincidence, one more unlucky reading, and 6 months of work would have ended in a cargo hold with a security team standing 3 meters from our hull." "But it didn't happen that way," Elena said. "This time," Dae-jung said. He looked up at her, and for a moment, the calm, methodical engineer she had known for 4 years looked simply tired, the way anyone might look after months of living with the knowledge that a single mistake could end everything. "Captain, can I ask you something? Do you ever think about what happens after this? If we survive it, I mean. If the war ends, and we actually get to go home?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I try not to," she admitted. "Not because I don't want the war to end. I want that more than almost anything. But this mission requires a kind of focus that doesn't leave much room for thinking about what comes after. If I start imagining home too clearly, I think some part of me will stop being as careful as this mission needs me to be." "That's a very disciplined way to live," Dae-jung said. "It's the only way I've found to survive it," Elena said. "You built this ship, Dae-jung. You built the systems that have kept 22 people alive inside enemy territory for half a year. When this is over, whenever that is, I intend to make sure the whole Federation knows what you did here, even if right now it has to stay a secret from everyone but us." Dae-jung managed a small, tired smile. "I'd settle for a bed that isn't built into a wall, Captain. Something with actual sunlight coming through a window that isn't covered by an armor shutter." "I'll see what I can do," Elena said, and for a moment, sitting in the small galley of a ship hidden inside the heart of an enemy fleet, the war felt very far away, even though it was, in truth, closer than either of them wanted to admit. Elena had joined the Nightfall Project 4 years earlier, in the aftermath of losing her sister's colony, a decision that some in Federation Command had questioned at the time, worried that grief might make her reckless in exactly the kind of mission that demanded patience above all else. She had spent the first year of her involvement proving them wrong, training under the program's original architects, learning every system aboard the prototype vessel that would eventually become the Wraith, and slowly earning the trust of a small, close-knit group of engineers and intelligence officers who understood, better than most of the Federation's military leadership, that this war would not be won by ships that fought battles in the open. She remembered the day Federation Command had approved the Wraith's first deep infiltration mission, a smaller operation than this one, a 6-week attempt to gather intelligence on a single Dominion shipyard. It had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, and it had taught Elena and her crew the fundamental lesson that shaped everything they had done since. The Dominion, for all its power, was not built to hunt something it could not see. Its entire military doctrine, refined over 8 centuries of conventional warfare, assumed that any enemy worth fearing would eventually reveal itself on a battlefield, in the open, where superior numbers and superior technology could be brought to bear. An enemy that refused to ever appear on that battlefield was, in a very real sense, an enemy the Dominion had never learned to fight. That lesson had carried the Wraith through 6 months inside the belly of Threx Kalorn's main fleet, and Elena intended to make sure it carried them through whatever came next as well. But she was honest enough with herself, sitting quietly with Dae-jung in the small hours of a sleepless night, to admit that every mission like this one eventually reached a point where patience alone was no longer enough, where the information gathered had to be used, and where using it meant accepting a level of risk that no amount of careful planning could fully erase. She did not yet know how soon that point would arrive, but she could feel it approaching, the way a sailor feels a storm building on the horizon long before the first drop of rain falls, and she intended to make sure that when it finally broke, her crew would be as ready for it as 6 months of careful, quiet work could make them. The following morning, if the artificial lighting cycle aboard the Wraith could be called morning, Elena called a full crew meeting, something she reserved for moments that genuinely required every member of her small team to hear the same information at the same time, rather than passing through the usual chain of department reports. 22 people crowded into the ship's largest open space, a cargo bay barely large enough to hold them all standing shoulder to shoulder, and waited quietly for their captain to speak. "I want to be honest with all of you about where we stand," Elena began. "Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn has ordered 3 security sweeps of this fleet in the last month. We survived all 3, but each one has come closer to finding us than the last. I don't say that to frighten anyone. I say it because every one of you deserves to understand exactly what risk we're carrying right now, not a simplified version of it." A murmur moved through the assembled crew, quiet but present, the sound of people absorbing difficult news together. "At the same time," Elena continued, "we've confirmed that this fleet is moving toward a rendezvous that could end the war in the Dominion's favor if it isn't stopped or delayed. We've already sent warning to Federation Command. That warning may be the single most important piece of intelligence this ship has gathered in 6 months of operation, but warning alone may not be enough, and I won't pretend otherwise. What are you asking of us, Captain?" The question came from a junior communications officer named Rafael Cortez, a steady, serious young man who had served aboard the Wraith since its very first mission. "I'm asking for continued discipline," Elena said. "Continued patience, even though patience has never felt harder than it does right now. And I'm asking every one of you to trust that if this mission requires something more than hiding and listening, something riskier, I will not make that decision without weighing it as carefully as I have weighed every decision on this ship for the last 6 months. You didn't volunteer for this program because it was safe. You volunteered because you believed the work mattered enough to be worth the risk. I need to know that belief still holds, especially now, when the risk is higher than it has ever been." The cargo bay was quiet for a long moment. Then Aiko Tanaka, the youngest member of the crew, spoke up from near the back. "Captain, for what it's worth, I didn't join this mission because I thought it would be easy. I joined because my cousin was on one of the transport ships that vanished during the 3rd year of the war, the ones nobody could ever explain. I want to be part of making sure other families don't lose people the same way, without even knowing why. If that means the risk gets higher before this is over, I'm still in." A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the rest of the crew, and Elena felt something steady settle in her chest, the particular kind of confidence that came not from certainty about the future, but from trust in the people standing beside her, to face whatever that future held. "Then we keep doing what we've always done," she said. "Careful, patient, and ready, when the moment comes, to be exactly as brave as this ship needs us to be." 3 days passed aboard the Wraith, and they were the quietest 3 days of the entire mission. No missions outside the ship, no small acts of sabotage against Dominion supply systems, the kind of quiet damage the crew had grown almost used to performing during the long months of hiding. Elena had ordered a full stand down on anything that might draw attention, and her crew, disciplined as they were, followed the order without complaint, even though the tension of doing nothing at all sat heavier on some of them than any dangerous mission ever had. The data transmission to Federation Command had completed on schedule, slipping out in careful pieces disguised as background static, each piece small enough to avoid triggering any automated Dominion filter. Elena did not know yet whether Federation Command had received it, understood it, or believed it. There was no way to check without sending another transmission, and she was not willing to risk that so soon after the security sweep that had come far too close to finding them. So they waited, and they watched, and they listened to the fleet around them prepare for war. "The other battle groups are starting their approach," Marcus reported, on the morning of the 4th day, his voice quiet in the small bridge. I'm picking up encrypted fleet movement orders. 3 separate groups, all converging toward the Threll Corridor rendezvous point. If our numbers were right, that puts total combined strength at 134 ships, Elena finished. She had memorized the number days ago. It followed her into what little sleep she managed to get. 134, Marcus confirmed. And Captain, I found something else. Buried in a supply manifest that got routed through this ship's own systems 2 days ago. The Dominion isn't just combining forces to hit the last Federation colonies. They're bringing something new. A weapons platform, codenamed Ashfall. I don't have full specs, but the manifest lists it as capable of, and I'm reading this directly, sterilizing planetary biospheres within a single operational cycle. The bridge went very quiet. They're planning to burn the colonies, Priya said. Not conquer them, erase them. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest, a feeling she recognized from 6 years of this war, the feeling of watching a threat become real in front of her, instead of remaining an abstract fear in a briefing document. She thought of her sister's colony, gone, in the 2nd year of the war, one world among many, that the Dominion had already erased in one way or another. She had spent 6 months telling herself that the information she was gathering would help end this war before it claimed more worlds like that one. Now she understood, with terrible clarity, exactly how much was riding on whether Federation Command had received her warning in time. We need confirmation that our transmission got through, she said, and we need details on this Ashfall platform. Full specs, deployment plans, everything. If Federation Command is going to have any chance at defending the remaining colonies, they need more than just a warning that an attack is coming. They need to know exactly what they're facing. That means another deep listening operation, Daejung said. Which means more risk, right after we already had a close call. I know, Elena said. But we didn't come 6 months into the belly of this fleet to stop the moment things got difficult. If this Ashfall weapon is real, we get everything we can on it. And we get it to Federation Command, whatever the risk. The plan that took shape over the following hours was more dangerous than anything the Wraith had attempted in months. The full technical specifications for a weapons platform as significant as Ashfall would not simply be sitting in an easily accessible supply manifest. That information would be held in the Dominion's secure command network, accessible only from specific terminals with the highest levels of clearance, likely including the bridge of the Voskari itself. I can build a physical intrusion device, Daejung said, laying out a small, dark component on the engineering table for the rest of the senior crew to see. Something we can attach directly to a data conduit somewhere in this ship's systems that connects, even indirectly, to the fleet's central network. It won't get us the same access as a bridge terminal, but if I can find the right junction point, it should let us pull data passively, without ever announcing our presence, the way an active hack would. Where's the nearest junction point, with a path to the central network? Elena asked. Daejung pulled up a schematic of KVN 771's internal systems, mapped painstakingly over 6 months of quiet observation. Here, he said, pointing to a maintenance shaft 2 decks above their hiding spot. It's a relay station that connects this transport systems to the fleet-wide logistics network, which in turn connects to command. It's not a direct line to classified command data, but logistics networks touch almost everything eventually, including weapons deployment schedules for something like Ashfall, if it's being distributed to specific ships. That means someone leaves the ship, Priya said, physically, outside our hidden compartment, through corridors that Dominion crew members walk through every day. I'll go, Elena said immediately. Captain. I'll go, she repeated. I'm not asking anyone else on this crew to take a risk. I'm not willing to take myself. Besides, if something goes wrong, the Wraith needs its captain making decisions from the bridge, not stuck in a corridor 2 decks away. Marcus, you're with me. You know Dominion security protocols better than anyone. Daejung, you'll guide us to the junction point and talk us through the installation. There was no real argument to be made against her logic, and everyone on the bridge knew it. Within the hour, Elena and Marcus stood at the hidden exit of the Wraith, dressed in nondescript maintenance coveralls of a design close enough to Dominion's standard issue to pass a casual glance, their faces covered by simple breathing masks that were common enough aboard older transport ships that nobody would think twice about them. Comms check, Daejung said quietly through their earpieces. Reading you clearly, Elena murmured. You have a window of roughly 40 minutes before the next scheduled crew rotation brings maintenance personnel through that section of the ship. Move quickly, but don't run. Running draws eyes. Elena and Marcus stepped out of the hidden compartment and into the dim maintenance corridors of KVN 771, corridors that Elena had only ever seen through borrowed camera feeds before now. It felt strange and exposed to walk them in person, her footsteps echoing faintly against metal walls that thousands of Dominion soldiers moved past every single day, any one of whom could turn a corner and find two humans who had no business being aboard their ship at all. They moved with careful, unhurried steps, following the path Dae-jung guided them through, past storage rooms and empty crew quarters, up a narrow maintenance ladder to the deck above. Twice they had to pause and press themselves into shadowed alcoves as distant footsteps passed through connecting corridors, footsteps that never came close enough to see them, but were close enough to make Elena's heart pound harder than she wanted to admit. Almost there, Dae-jung said. Junction relay should be through the next hatch. The hatch opened into a small, cramped mechanical room, filled with humming conduits and access panels, exactly as the schematic had promised. Marcus moved immediately to keep watch at the hatch, while Elena knelt beside the main data conduit and carefully attached the small intrusion device Dae-jung had built, following his quiet, precise instructions through her earpiece. Connection established, Dae-jung reported a few minutes later. It's slow, Captain, and it's passive, but it's pulling data. I'm seeing logistics traffic, supply schedules, and... Wait, I've got something on Ashfall. Deployment authorization codes, distribution manifest. Captain, this is good. This is really good. How much longer do you need? Elena asked quietly. Give me 10 more minutes, and I'll have everything the logistics network has on that weapon. Elena checked the time. They were 15 minutes into their 40-minute window. 10 more minutes for the device, plus the time to return to the Wraith, would leave them cutting things closer than she liked, but still within the margin Dae-jung had calculated. Take your 10 minutes, she said. We'll hold position. They waited in tense silence, Marcus watching the hatch, Elena watching the small device blink steadily as it pulled data from the Dominion's own network without their knowledge. Minutes passed slowly in the cramped mechanical room, the hum of conduits the only sound besides their own careful breathing. 8 minutes, Dae-jung said. Data's still coming. This is more detailed than I expected. Captain, I think I'm seeing something about Ashfall's activation timeline. It's not scheduled to deploy with the initial fleet strike. It's being held back, brought online only after the main fleet secures orbital control of the target colonies. They want to make sure nothing valuable gets destroyed by Ashfall before they've stripped anything worth taking. Small mercy, Marcus muttered. Means there's a window where the colonies could still be evacuated, even if the fleet arrives first. A small window, Elena said. But a window. 5 minutes, Dae-jung said. Then, a moment later, his voice sharpened with sudden alarm. Captain, wait! I'm seeing something in the network traffic, a priority alert, originating from the Vos Kari, flagged for immediate distribution to all security personnel fleet-wide. What kind of alert? It's a general order. Increase security posture across the entire fleet, effective immediately. All maintenance and logistics personnel are being recalled to designated stations for a fleet-wide identity verification sweep. Dae-jung's voice tightened further. Captain, that includes this section of KVN 771. Right now. Elena's blood went cold. How long until verification teams reach this deck? I don't know. Could be minutes. Could be less. Marcus was already moving toward the hatch, weapon-free hands tense at his sides, listening for any sound of approaching footsteps. Captain, we need to move. Now. Elena's fingers worked fast, disconnecting the intrusion device from the conduit, pocketing it in one smooth motion even as her mind raced through the layout of the ship, calculating the fastest and safest path back to the hidden compartment 2 decks below. Dae-jung, do you have the Ashfall data? Enough of it, not everything, but enough. Then we move, Elena said, and stepped toward the hatch beside Marcus. Quietly, but quickly. If this is a fleet-wide sweep, and not just another sensor anomaly, then Threx Kalorn isn't just suspicious anymore. He's acting on it. They stepped out into the corridor, and somewhere in the near distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of boots moving in disciplined formation, the sound of a security team beginning its sweep of the deck. moving steadily closer to the exact section of the ship where two humans had no business being found. Before the mission to plant the intrusion device had even begun, Elena had spent an hour studying everything the Wraith's systems had gathered on Dominion security procedures, refreshing knowledge she already carried, but wanted sharp and ready, before stepping outside her ship's protective hull. Marcus had sat with her through most of that hour, running through likely patrol patterns based on months of listening to Dominion communications. Their verification sweeps follow a fairly rigid protocol, Marcus had explained, pulling up a rough diagram of typical Dominion security movement. Teams of 3 to 6 soldiers, moving deck by deck, checking identification against the central crew roster. The weakness in the system is that the roster itself is enormous. Tens of thousands of names across a fleet this size, constantly being updated as personnel transfer between ships. A forged identity that matches the format and doesn't trigger an obvious contradiction has a real chance of passing a casual scan, especially from soldiers who are tired, bored, and running through their 200th verification of the day. And an intense scan? Elena had asked. Not casual. Someone actually looking hard at what they're seeing? That's where we'd be in trouble, Marcus admitted. A forged chip can fool a scanner reading surface-level data. It can't survive someone cross-referencing it against deeper personnel records in real time, not unless Dae-jung has built something far more sophisticated than I think he has. I have, Dae-jung had said, without looking up from his workstation. But let's hope we don't have to find out how well it holds up. That conversation echoed in Elena's mind now, as she and Marcus moved quickly but carefully back toward the hidden compartment, the sound of boots growing louder behind them with every passing second. They had already survived one identification check. The odds of surviving a second, more thorough one, grew worse with every additional soldier who might glance their way and decide something did not quite add up. Left at the next junction, Dae-jung said in her ear, his voice tight with focus as he watched their position relative to the approaching security teams through borrowed camera feeds. That should put you on a path that avoids both patrol groups entirely. But Captain, I want you to know the margin here is thin. If either team adjusts their route even slightly, you could walk right into them. Understood, Elena murmured. Keep watching. They took the left junction, moving through a narrow service corridor lined with old storage lockers, their footsteps as quiet as either of them could manage, while still moving at a pace that would not look suspicious if anyone happened to glance down the corridor behind them. Elena's mind ran through contingencies as she walked, calculating what she would do if they were stopped again, what she would say, how far she was willing to let a confrontation escalate before doing something far more drastic than simply presenting a forged identification chip. She had never had to use serious force during any of the Wraith's 6 months inside the fleet, and she desperately did not want this to be the first time. Not because she doubted her own ability, or Marcus's, both of them trained extensively before this mission ever began, but because any use of force, however small, would end any hope of continued secrecy. A missing security team would be noticed within the hour. A missing security team on the exact ship that had already been flagged for an unexplained power anomaly would draw exactly the kind of scrutiny that could unravel everything. Clear, Dae-jung said finally, as they reached a junction that led directly back toward the maintenance shaft above their hidden compartment. Both patrol teams have moved past this section. You have a clear path for the next 90 seconds. But Captain, I'd move fast. They moved fast, descending the maintenance ladder 2 decks down with practiced efficiency, and reached the section of wall hiding the Wraith's entrance with perhaps 30 seconds to spare before Dae-jung's next update would have told them a third patrol group was approaching from an unexpected direction. The wall shimmered open, and they stepped through into the familiar, close quarters of the Wraith's interior, the compartment sealing shut behind them with a soft, reassuring hiss. Elena allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to feel relief before turning her mind back to the data they had gathered, the mission far from finished, even though the most immediate danger had passed. The information Dae-jung had pulled from the Dominion's logistics network proved, over the following hours of careful analysis, to be even more valuable than Elena had initially hoped. Beyond the deployment timeline for the HFY platform, the stolen data included partial technical specifications, enough for Federation weapons researchers to potentially begin developing countermeasures, and a list of the specific colonies, the combined Dominion strike force, intended to target first, once it reached the Threll Corridor rendezvous. Colony 7, New Meridian, and the Kestrel Outpost. Priya read aloud from the decrypted list, her voice carefully controlled despite the weight of what she was saying. In that order. Colony 7 has the largest civilian population of the three, nearly 200,000 people. How much warning would Federation Command need to organize a full evacuation of a colony that size? Elena asked. Under ideal conditions, with enough transport ships available, maybe 5 days, Priya said. Realistically, with the transport shortages the Federation has been dealing with since the war began, closer to 2 weeks. And the fleet reaches the Threll Corridor rendezvous in 7 days, Elena said quietly. Even if they don't launch the attack immediately after combining forces, that doesn't leave much margin. It doesn't leave any margin at all, if my estimate is right, Priya said. Elena stared at the star chart on the main display, tracing the projected path of Threx Kalorn's fleet toward its rendezvous point, and felt the full weight of what they had learned settle over her. 6 months of patient, careful intelligence gathering had brought them to this moment, and the information they now carried was exactly the kind of thing that could save 200,000 lives, or fail to reach anyone in time to matter at all, depending on choices that had not yet been made. We need to get this data out immediately, she said. Not just the warning we already sent. Everything. The full Ashfall specifications, the target list, the timeline. Federation Command needs to see all of it, and they need to see it now, not in some careful, drawn-out transmission over the next 4 hours. That kind of data volume, sent quickly instead of slowly, is far more likely to be detected, Marcus said. Captain, I understand the urgency, but if we get caught transmitting a burst that large, I know the risk, Elena said. But weigh it against the alternative. If this fleet reaches its rendezvous and launches its attack before Federation Command has real time to prepare, 200,000 people on Colony 7 alone may not survive it. I would rather risk this ship than risk that outcome. The bridge was quiet for a long moment, every member of the senior crew understanding exactly what she was asking of them, and exactly what it might cost. Then we do it carefully, Dae-jung said finally, not reckless, but faster than we've ever pushed a transmission before. I can compress the data further, cut transmission time by half if we accept a small increase in the risk of detection. It's not a perfect solution, Captain, but it's the best one I can offer on short notice. Do it, Elena said. As soon as it's ready, we send everything. Above them, the security sweep continued its methodical progress through the remainder of the fleet, and Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn, still unsatisfied by a search that had found nothing more than an old power relay he did not entirely believe was the true explanation, gave the order for a second, more thorough search to be scheduled within the week. The footsteps grew louder as Elena and Marcus moved through the corridor, and every instinct in Elena's body told her to run. She did not. Running was the fastest way to turn a routine security sweep into a chase, and a chase was the fastest way to get caught. Instead, she forced her pace to stay even, unhurried, the pace of 2 maintenance workers heading back to their assigned station, like 100 other crew members were doing at that exact moment across the ship. Next junction. Take the left corridor, Dae-jung said quietly through her earpiece, his voice tense but controlled. It'll add 2 minutes to your path, but it avoids the main intersection, where the security team is heading. They turned left. Behind them, the sound of boots grew briefly louder, before fading again, as the security team passed through the main intersection, without turning down the side corridor Elena and Marcus had taken. For a moment, it seemed as though they might slip past unnoticed after all. Then, ahead of them, a second set of footsteps appeared, closer this time, coming from the very direction they were heading. Dae-jung, Elena said under her breath. I see it. Second security team must have split off to cover more ground. Captain, there's no way around them on this route. You're going to walk right into them. Elena's mind raced. Turning back now would mean walking directly toward the first team. Continuing forward would mean walking directly toward the second. There was no clean path back to the hidden compartment that avoided both. We don't avoid them, she said quietly to Marcus. We walk past them. Maintenance workers, tired, minding our own business, nothing more. Marcus gave a single, tight nod. They rounded the next corner and found themselves face to face with 3 Dominion soldiers moving in the opposite direction, scanners in hand, clearly part of the security sweep Dae-jung had warned them about. Elena kept her eyes down in the universal posture of a low-ranking worker who did not wish to draw the attention of armed superiors, and continued walking at an unhurried pace. One of the soldiers glanced at them as they passed, a brief, disinterested look that swept over their coveralls and breathing masks without lingering. For one long, suspended moment, Elena thought they would simply pass by without incident. Then the soldier stopped. "You two," he said. "Identification." Elena's heart pounded, but her face remained calm as she turned toward him, reaching into the coverall pocket where Daejung had, months ago, planted a small forged identification chip designed to pass a casual scan, though never tested against a dedicated verification sweep. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice pitched low and even, filtered slightly by the breathing mask, in a way that made it difficult to identify as anything other than tired and human-sounding, in the general way that many Dominion species translated voices sounded when run through standard equipment. She held out the chip. The soldier ran his scanner over it. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened, and Elena felt the entire weight of 6 months of careful hiding, balanced on the outcome of that single scan. The scanner blinked green. "Cleared," the soldier said, already losing interest, his attention shifting to the scanner in his hand as he moved on to whatever was next on his checklist. "Report to your assigned station for the remainder of the sweep." "Understood," Elena said, and continued walking, forcing herself not to speed up, not to look back, not to do anything except keep the same steady, unremarkable pace until they had turned the next corner and were out of sight. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. "That was too close," Marcus murmured. "Agreed," Elena said. "Daejung, get us back to the compartment. Fastest safe route. I don't care about detours anymore." They reached the hidden entrance 7 minutes later, slipping back into the Wraith and sealing the compartment behind them just as, somewhere above, the fleet-wide security sweep continued its methodical progress through every deck of every ship. Elena stripped off the breathing mask and the borrowed coveralls, and found her hands were shaking slightly, an after effect she allowed herself only now that she was safely back aboard. "Report," she said, moving to the bridge. "The sweep is still ongoing," Priya said. "But Captain, I think we need to talk about what this means. This isn't a random security measure. Threx Kalorn ordered a fleet-wide identity verification sweep less than a week after his own security team found an unexplained power anomaly on this exact ship. That's not a coincidence." "He's not just suspicious anymore," Elena said. "He's actively hunting. And we just walked directly into one of his security checkpoints," Marcus added. "We passed, but Captain, if he orders another sweep, a more thorough one, with better equipment, we won't have a forged ID chip that survives a second look." Elena sat down slowly in her captain's chair, thinking through the situation with the same cold, careful logic that had kept her crew alive for 6 months. The Dominion suspected something aboard this specific transport ship. They had not found the Wraith itself, not yet, but every close call brought that discovery closer. And in 7 days, this fleet would reach the Threll Corridor rendezvous point and combine into a force capable of ending the Federation for good, a force that would soon be joined by a weapon designed to erase entire biospheres. They had the data on Ashfall now, or most of it. They had confirmed that Federation Command had, or should have, received the earlier warning about the fleet's true destination. The mission, in the strictest sense, had already accomplished what it set out to do. But Elena found herself thinking about something else entirely. Something that had been building quietly in the back of her mind for months, ever since she had first understood the sheer scale of the force gathering in the Threll Corridor. "Daejung," she said, "earlier you mentioned surprises. Things you built into this ship that we've never had to use." Daejung looked up from his console, understanding immediately where her thoughts were heading. "Captain, are you thinking about using them?" "I'm thinking about what happens if we simply run," Elena said. "We slip away quietly before the next sweep. We deliver the last of the Ashfall data to Federation Command, and this fleet still reaches the Threll Corridor, still combines with the others, still comes for the last colonies with a weapon built to sterilize entire worlds. We've spent 6 months gathering information. What if information alone isn't enough anymore?" The bridge went quiet. Every member of the senior crew understood exactly what she was suggesting, even before she said it plainly. "You want to attack the fleet from the inside," Priya said. "I want to know what options we actually have," Elena said. "Daejung, tell me honestly, what did you build into this ship?" Daejung was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. The Wraith was designed for stealth and intelligence gathering, not combat. You know that better than anyone, Captain. But 6 months ago, before we ever docked with this fleet, I made some modifications, mostly using components I salvaged from damaged Dominion equipment during our earlier operations. I built a device that can generate a very short, very intense electromagnetic pulse, powerful enough to disable unshielded systems within a significant radius. Enough, potentially, to knock out primary power and weapon systems on several nearby ships simultaneously, if we were positioned correctly when we used it. How many ships? Elena asked. Realistically, in this fleet's current formation, with KVN 771 docked where it is, relative to the Voskari and the surrounding battle group, maybe 6 to 8 vessels disabled long enough to matter. The Voskari itself would likely be within range. And after we use it? Marcus asked. Captain, the moment that pulse fires, every stealth advantage we've had for 6 months is gone. They'll know exactly where we are. 130 ships, minus whatever we manage to disable, will turn every weapon they have on this transport. I know, Elena said quietly, which is why I'm not making this decision alone, and I'm not making it without understanding every consequence first. She looked around at her crew, 22 people who had trusted her with their lives for 6 months, who deserved honesty now more than ever. If we use this pulse, disable part of this fleet, and expose ourselves in the process, our odds of getting out of this alive are not good. I won't pretend otherwise. But if we do nothing, and this fleet reaches the Threll corridor untouched, the last Federation colonies may not survive what comes next, no matter what warning we've already sent. There's a third option, Priya said slowly. We disable what ships we can, but we do it timed with an escape, not a suicide run. Daejung, if the pulse disables nearby ship systems, does it affect this transport too? Does it affect us? I built shielding into the Wraith, specifically so it wouldn't, Daejung said. KVN 771 itself, the ship we're hidden inside, would likely lose power in the blast radius, along with everyone else nearby. But the Wraith would stay operational. If we time it right, we could use the resulting chaos, ships losing power, crews scrambling to restore systems, confusion across the fleet, as cover to break away from KVN 771 entirely, and make a run for open space, before anyone organizes a coordinated pursuit. Elena felt something settle in her chest, a plan taking shape from possibility into something almost real. How long would we need to prepare the pulse device and set up for an escape run? 18 hours, maybe 20, to be safe, Daejung said. I'd want to double-check every connection myself, and we'd need to plot an escape vector that gets us clear of the fleet's likely response patterns. Elena stood, looking at the diagram of Threx Kalorn's battle fleet still displayed on the main screen, 41 ships in the immediate formation around them, part of 134 total force, moving steadily toward a rendezvous that would seal the fate of everything the Federation had left. 20 hours, she said. Then we hit them from the inside. We cripple as much of this formation as we can, and we run like hell for open space. Daejung, Marcus, I want everyone else brought up to speed, and every system on this ship checked twice before we commit to this. If we're doing this, we do it right, and we do it together. She looked around the small bridge one more time, at the faces of people who had followed her into the heart of enemy territory and stayed there for 6 months without complaint, and felt, for the first time since this mission began, a strange and fierce kind of certainty settle over her. 6 months. We've been the ghost this fleet was afraid of and never found, she said. Let's give Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn a reason to have been right to be afraid. The next several hours passed in the particular kind of focused, controlled activity that Elena had come to recognize as the true rhythm of her crew under pressure. There was no panic, no wasted motion, only 22 people quietly doing the jobs they had trained years to do, preparing a small ship hidden inside enemy territory to do something no vessel like it had ever attempted before. Marcus spent the time refining his read of the fleet's internal communications, building as complete a picture as he could of exactly which ships occupied which positions relative to KVN 771, information that would matter enormously once the pulse fired and Priya needed to navigate through a formation thrown into sudden chaos. I've confirmed the Voskari's position, he reported partway through the preparation, pulling up a tactical overlay on the main screen. It's closer to us than I initially estimated, well within pulse range. If Daejung's device performs the way the simulations suggest, we should be able to knock out the flagship's primary systems, along with everything else nearby. Disabling the flagship isn't just about tactical advantage, Elena said, studying the overlay. It buys us something else, confusion at the top. If Threx Kalorn's own bridge goes dark along with everyone else's, there's no one in a position to immediately organize an intelligent response. Every ship in that formation will be looking to the flagship for orders, and for a critical few minutes, there won't be any orders to give. Assuming he doesn't have some kind of emergency backup command protocol, Priya said. Every fleet has emergency protocols, Elena said. The question is how fast they can actually implement one in the middle of genuine chaos, with half their sensors down, and half their crew still trying to figure out what happened. That's the window we're counting on. Not permanent advantage. Just enough time. Elena spent part of the preparation period doing something she had not done in months. Reviewing, in detail, the full personnel files of every member of her crew, reminding herself of the specific skills, and specific fears, and specific reasons each of them had volunteered for a mission that asks so much of all of them. She found herself lingering longest on the file of her youngest crew member, a 22-year-old systems technician named Aiko Tanaka, who had joined the Nightfall project straight out of Federation training, too young by most standards to be assigned to a mission this dangerous, but talented enough that the program's leadership had made an exception. She found Aiko in the ship's cramped equipment bay, double-checking the emergency environmental systems that would need to function perfectly if the Wraith took any damage during its escape. "How are you holding up?" Elena asked, settling into the narrow space beside her. "Honestly, Captain, terrified," Aiko admitted, not looking up from her work, but also kind of excited, which feels like a strange thing to admit right before we do something this dangerous. "It's not strange," Elena said. "Fear and purpose aren't opposites. Sometimes the most meaningful things we do are the ones that frighten us most." "Did you feel that way?" Aiko asked. "Before your first real mission, I mean. Back when all of this was still new to you." Elena thought back to that first 6-week infiltration years ago, the tightness in her chest every single day of it, the way she had learned to work alongside that fear, instead of waiting for it to disappear. "Every time," she said. "I don't think that feeling ever really goes away. Not completely. You just get better at trusting yourself despite it." Aiko nodded slowly, seeming to take some comfort in the honesty of the answer, and returned to her work with steadier hands than before. As the final hour of preparation approached, Elena gathered her senior officers one last time to review the plan in full, wanting every person responsible for a critical system to understand exactly how each piece fit together before they committed to something that could not be undone once started. "Daejung fires the pulse the moment I give the order," she said, tracing the sequence on the tactical display. "The blast disables unshielded systems on KVN 771 and at least 6 to 8 nearby capital ships, including, if our positioning holds, the Vos Kamari itself. The instant the pulse fires, we detach from the cargo hold and Priya takes us out along Vector 3, using the gap created by disabled ships drifting out of formation." "And if Vector 3 closes faster than expected?" Marcus asked. "Then Priya adapts in real time," Elena said, glancing toward her second officer, who nodded with the calm confidence of someone who had spent the last day running exactly this scenario through every simulation she could construct. "We have 2 backup vectors ready, if the primary route becomes unworkable. Once we're clear of the formation, we go to full engine power, something we've never needed to do during this entire mission, and we make for the nearest safe Federation rendezvous point to deliver everything we've gathered." "What about pursuit?" asked Aiko, who had been included in this final briefing along with the rest of the crew. "Once ships in that formation restore power, won't they come after us?" "Some of them will try," Elena said honestly, "but a fleet recovering from a coordinated systems failure isn't going to organize an effective pursuit in minutes. It will take time to restore power, time to assess damage, time to figure out what actually happened and decide how to respond. We only need enough of a head start to put real distance between us and them before that response comes together. If Priya's escape vectors hold, and if Daejung's device performs as designed, we should have exactly that." She looked around at her crew one final time, seeing in their faces the same mixture of fear and determination she had felt on her very first mission years ago, and the same fierce, quiet resolve that had carried the Wraith through 6 months of hiding in the heart of an enemy that had hunted them without ever finding them. "I won't pretend this isn't dangerous," she said. "It is. But everything we've done for the last 6 months has been leading toward a moment where the information we've gathered actually matters, where it actually changes what happens next for the people we're fighting to protect. This is that moment. Let's make sure it counts." In the final minutes before the operation began, Elena returned briefly to her quarters, a space barely larger than a closet, containing only a narrow bunk, a small storage locker, and a single photograph tucked into the frame of a personal display screen. The photograph showed her sister, Marin, smiling on a beach on the colony world that no longer existed, taken less than a year before the Dominion attack that had ended both the colony and Marin's life in the same terrible afternoon. Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment, the way she often did before dangerous operations, not out of superstition exactly, but because it reminded her, every time, exactly why the risks she asked her crew to take were worth taking. "We're about to do something that might actually matter, Marin," she said quietly, to a photograph that could not hear her. In the private ritual she had never explained to anyone aboard the Wraith, not even Priya, who had served with her the longest. "I hope it's enough." She closed the locker, straightened her uniform, and walked back to the bridge with the steady, controlled composure her crew depended on, leaving behind, for now, the grief that had first brought her to this program, carrying forward only the purpose it had become. On the bridge, her officers waited at their stations, each of them running final checks on the systems that would matter most in the next several minutes. The Daejung sat at his engineering console, the pulse device's activation controls glowing softly in front of him. Priya had the 3 escape vectors loaded and ready, her hands steady on the navigation controls. Marcus monitored the fleet's communications for any sign that their preparations had been detected, finding, to his evident relief, nothing but the ordinary chatter of a fleet that still believed itself to be alone. "Position confirmed," Marcus said. "We're still docked in KVN 771, still within pulse range of the Voskari and 7 other capital ships. No change in the fleet's general alert status." "Then there's no reason to wait any longer," Elena said, settling into her captain's chair and feeling the familiar weight of command settle over her shoulders. "Daejung, run your final systems check." "Systems nominal, Captain. Pulse device fully charged and ready." "Shielding confirmed active across all critical Wraith systems." "Priya, confirm Vector 3 is still our best option." "Confirmed, Captain. Formation hasn't shifted since our last update. Vector 3 remains our clearest path out." Elena took one final breath, feeling the quiet, focused calm of her crew around her. 22 people who had trusted her judgment through 6 months of danger, and were trusting it now, in what might be the most consequential few minutes of the entire mission. "Then let's finish what we came here to do," she said. "Daejung, on my mark." 20 hours became 22, by the time Daejung was satisfied with every connection on the pulse device, and Elena did not rush him. A device that could either save her crew, or fail catastrophically, at the worst possible moment, deserved every extra minute of care he wanted to give it. While he worked, Priya plotted 3 different escape vectors, running each through every simulation the Wraith systems could manage, searching for the path that gave them the best odds of slipping past a fleet suddenly thrown into chaos and confusion. Elena spent the final hours doing something she rarely allowed herself the luxury of, talking to her crew, one by one, in the quiet corners of the ship, not giving orders, just talking. She wanted every person aboard the Wraith to know, going into what might be the most dangerous thing any of them had ever done, that their captain saw them as people first, and crew second. "Captain," Daejung said finally, stepping onto the bridge with the pulse device's control unit in his hands, a compact box, no larger than a toolkit, humming faintly with contained power. "It's ready. I've tested every subsystem I can test without actually firing it. I can't promise it'll work exactly the way the simulations say, but I believe in it." "Then we're ready," Elena said, and felt the weight of the moment settle over the entire bridge. "Fleet position confirmed," Marcus reported. "We're still docked in KVN 771's cargo hold, still in formation with the Voskari and 7 other capital ships within pulse range. No indication they suspect anything beyond the general security posture they've maintained for the last few days. Priya, best escape vector? Vector 3, Priya said. It takes us out through a gap in the formation, created by KVN 771's own position on the fleet's outer edge. If the pulse disables the ships closest to us, that gap widens for the critical window we need. Then Vector 3 it is, Elena said. She took a slow breath, feeling the familiar calm that settled over her in the moments before action, the calm that came from months of preparation, finally reaching their point of decision. Dae-jung, on my mark. The bridge was silent, except for the low hum of the ship's systems, and the quiet counting of Dae-jung's voice as he ran through the final activation sequence. 3, 2, 1, firing. The pulse device released its charge in a burst that lasted less than 2 seconds, invisible and silent from inside the shielded hull of the Wraith, but devastating in its effect on every unshielded system within its radius. Across the docking bay, across the length of KVN 771, and across the 7 nearby capital ships including the Vos Kari itself, lights flickered and died. Primary power systems tripped into emergency shutdown. Weapons arrays went dark mid-cycle. Communication arrays fell silent, cutting every ship in the blast radius off from the rest of the fleet in the same instant. On the bridge of the Vos Kari, Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn found himself plunged into darkness, emergency lighting flickering weakly to life a few seconds later, as backup systems struggled to compensate for the sudden, inexplicable loss of primary power. Report. He barked into the chaos, soldiers scrambling at dead consoles around him. All primary systems down, Admiral, came the frantic reply from his tactical officer. Power, weapons, long-range communications, all offline simultaneously. I've never seen anything like it. Cause? Unknown. No external attack signature detected. It came from inside the fleet's own formation. Threx's blood ran cold, with a certainty he had been circling for weeks without ever quite being able to prove. The Darkship, he said quietly. It's here. It's been here the entire time. Below, in the chaos of KVN 771's dead systems and scrambling maintenance crews trying to understand why the entire transport had lost power without warning, the Wraith detached from its hidden dock and slipped free of the cargo hold, its own systems fully operational, protected exactly as Dae-jung had promised, by shielding built for precisely this moment. We're clear of the hold, Marcus reported, voice tight with focus. Moving through the gap on Vector 3 now. Elena watched the tactical display as the Wraith threaded its way through the confusion of a fleet formation, thrown into sudden disorder. Ships without power, drifting slightly out of position. Crews too consumed with emergency repairs to notice a small, nearly undetectable vessel slipping silently between them. 2 minutes to formation edge, Priya said. Any pursuit? Elena asked. Nothing yet. Most of the fleet doesn't even have working sensors right now, let alone weapons. But Captain, the ships outside the pulse radius still have full power. If any of them get a lock on us before we clear the formation entirely, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Elena said. Keep us on Vector 3. The Wraith moved through the darkened heart of the Dominion's crippled battle group like exactly what it had been for 6 months. A shadow no one could quite see, slipping between giants too wounded and too confused to notice one more small shape moving through the wreckage of their own formation. Elena watched the seconds tick by on the tactical display, every one of them feeling longer than the last. 1 minute to formation edge, Priya said. On the bridge of the Vos Kari, Threx Kalorn stood amid the chaos of his crew, fighting to restore power, staring at the one sensor system that had, by some stroke of luck or stubborn engineering, remained partially functional. A short-range visual scanner, weak and grainy, but active. And on that grainy feed, for one fraction of a second, something flickered into and out of visibility near the edge of the formation, a shape too small to be a warship, moving with a purpose and a speed that no ordinary vessel drifting in the chaos should have possessed. There, Threx said, pointing at the screen with a hand that was not quite steady. That is our ghost. Admiral, weapons are still offline. We can't. I know what we can't do, Threx said, but I want it recorded. Every scrap of data that scanner captured. For 6 years this thing has haunted our fleets, and for 6 months, it seems. It has been sitting inside my own formation, listening to everything we said, and I never saw it. I want to know what we're truly facing before I ever chase it again." The grainy image held for less than 2 seconds before the wraith passed beyond the scanner's weak range and vanished into open space, clear of the formation entirely, its engines opening to full power, now that stealth no longer mattered as much as speed. "We're clear," Marcus said, and something in his voice cracked with the release of tension that had been building for the better part of a day. "Captain, we're clear of the fleet." Elena allowed herself, for the first time in 22 hours, to exhale fully. "Set course for the nearest Federation rendezvous point," she said, "and send word ahead. Let them know the ashfall data, and everything else we've gathered is coming in with us, along with confirmation that 8 capital ships in Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn's fleet have been disabled and delayed on their approach to the Threll corridor." "How long will the delay buy the colonies?" Priya asked. "Long enough, I hope," Elena said. "Repairs to systems that size don't happen overnight. Every day this fleet is delayed is a day the Federation has to prepare, to evacuate what it can, to meet this force with something better than nothing." The wraith sailed on through open space, small and silent and free, leaving behind a Dominion fleet that would spend the next several days in confused repair, and a Grand Admiral who would spend far longer than that, trying to understand exactly how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered by a ship he had hunted for 6 years without ever truly seeing. 3 weeks later, Federation Command released a short, carefully worded statement to the remaining colonies of the Sol Federation, confirming that a major Dominion offensive aimed at several key systems had been detected, delayed, and was now being actively countered, thanks to what the statement called extraordinary intelligence work performed deep within enemy territory. It did not name the Wraith. It did not name Elena Voss or her crew. The mission remained, as it always had, a secret, held closely by the very few who needed to know it. But aboard a small, dark ship somewhere in the quiet space between stars, a crew of 22 humans, who had spent 6 months living inside the heart of an empire that wanted them dead, sat together and allowed themselves, just for one evening, to feel something like relief. "They're calling us the Darkship in every report now," Marcus said, reading through decrypted Dominion communications with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Officially, not just a rumor anymore." Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn wrote an entire report trying to explain how a Federation ship lived inside his own fleet for half a year without being found. "What did he conclude?" Elena asked. "That humans are more dangerous patient than they are powerful," Marcus said, his words more or less. Elena thought about that for a long moment, about 6 years of a war that should have ended with Earth's surrender in the first month, about a fleet of 134 warships, and a weapon built to erase entire worlds, delayed now, not defeated, but delayed, by 22 people, and one very quiet ship that had learned, better than anyone, how to disappear. "He's not wrong," she said finally. "Patience is the one thing this war has taught us better than anything else. Set a course home, Marcus. Let's go see if there's still an Earth left standing to be proud of what we just did." Behind them, the empty space where the Wraith had spent 6 silent months slowly filled again with distance, and somewhere far ahead, the war went on, waiting for whatever the Darkship and the humans who commanded it would choose to do next. The journey back to Federation space took 11 days, and for the first time in over half a year, Elena's crew flew without the constant, grinding tension of hiding inside enemy territory. It was not a peaceful journey exactly, not with the knowledge of what waited for the colonies they were racing to help protect, but it was, in its own way, a kind of relief that Elena had almost forgotten how to feel. On the 4th day of the return journey, they received their first confirmed response from Federation Command, a tightly encrypted transmission that Marcus decoded with visible relief on his face. "They got everything," he reported to the assembled bridge crew. Both transmissions, the original warning about the Threll corridor rendezvous, and the full data package on Ashfall and the target list. Federation Command has already begun emergency evacuation procedures for Colony 7, New Meridian, and the Kestrel outpost. "How much of the population can they realistically move in the time available?" Elena asked. "They're estimating 60 to 70% of Colony 7's civilians can be evacuated before the delayed fleet is likely to arrive, assuming the repair timeline we disrupted holds," Marcus said. New Meridian and the Kestrel outpost have smaller populations and better transport access. They're expecting closer to full evacuation for both. It was not the perfect outcome Elena had hoped for when she first understood the scale of what the Dominion intended. 60 to 70% was not everyone. Somewhere in that gap between the number saved and the number who called Colony 7 home, real people would still lose everything, and Elena understood, with the particular weight that came from 6 years of a war defined by exactly this kind of imperfect math, that she would carry that gap with her for a long time. But it was so much more than nothing. It was 200,000 people who now had a chance, where 7 days earlier they would have had none at all. "There's more," Marcus said, still reading through the decrypted message. "Federation weapons researchers have already begun analyzing the partial ashfall specifications we recovered. Preliminary assessment suggests there may be a way to shield planetary defense grids against at least the early stages of the platform's effect, buying additional time, even for colonies that can't be fully evacuated before the fleet arrives." Elena felt something loosen slightly in her chest at that news, a small but real thread of hope woven into what had otherwise felt like an unavoidable tragedy, still unfolding somewhere ahead of them. "Send our thanks to the research teams," she said, "and ask if there's anything more we can provide from what we gathered that might help them refine those defenses further." "Already sending it, Captain." On the 7th day of the return journey, Elena finally allowed herself to review, in full, the report Dae-jung had compiled on the Pulse device's performance during their escape, data he had been quietly analyzing in the background, while the rest of the crew focused on getting the Wraith safely home. 8 ships confirmed disabled, he reported, sitting across from her in the small galley that had become, over the months, something like a second bridge for the quiet conversations that never happened during official briefings, including the Vos Kari. Repair estimates, based on the systems we know were affected and typical Dominion repair capacity, suggest the flagship alone would need somewhere between 4 and 6 days to fully restore primary power and weapons systems. The other 7 ships, being smaller and less complex, likely came back online faster, but even a day or two of delay across a formation that size creates real logistical problems for a fleet trying to coordinate a rendezvous with 3 other battle groups. "So the delay we bought is real," Elena said. "It's real," Dae-jung confirmed. "Whether it's enough, whether the timeline shifts far enough to matter for the colonies, that's not something I can calculate with certainty. But it's not nothing, Captain. 6 months of intelligence work, 1 pulse device, and 22 people who refused to give up when things got difficult. It's not nothing at all." Elena thought about Grand Admiral Threx Kalorn, a man she had never met, and likely never would. A man who had spent 6 years hunting a ghost that had, in the end, been sitting quietly inside his own fleet the entire time he searched for it. She wondered, briefly, what he was thinking now, in the aftermath of an attack he could not fully explain, carried out by an enemy he had never truly seen. She did not know that, at that very moment, on the repaired but still shaken bridge of the Vos Kari, Threx Kalorn was staring at the same grainy sensor image his crew had captured during the chaos of the pulse attack, the brief, flickering shape of a small vessel slipping away into open space, and making a private vow to himself that he intended to keep for as long as this war continued. He did not yet know her name. He did not know the name of her ship, beyond the rumor and fear that had already spread through his own fleet. But he understood, with the clear-eyed certainty of a career soldier who had just learned an uncomfortable and important lesson, that the war he was fighting was not the war he thought he had been fighting all along, and that understanding, however painful, was its own kind of victory for the crew of the ship he could not catch. 2 months after the Wraith's escape from the Threll Corridor fleet, Elena Voss stood in a quiet briefing room on a Federation outpost far from the front lines, watching a young systems technician named Aiko Tanaka receive a commendation for her work aboard a mission that officially, on any public record, did not exist. The room was small, the ceremony brief and private, attended only by those with the clearance to know what had actually happened deep inside Dominion territory. Colony 7 had lost 31,000 people in the eventual Dominion assault, a number that still sat heavy in Elena's chest every time she thought of it. But New Meridian and the Kestrel outpost had been fully evacuated in time, and the shielding developed from the partial ashfall data had, according to the reports that reached her, saved thousands more lives during the attack itself, protecting evacuation transports and defense installations that would otherwise have been erased in the platform's first activation. It was not the outcome anyone had hoped for. War rarely offered outcomes anyone hoped for. But it was, Elena had come to understand, the outcome that patience and quiet, careful work could sometimes buy, when the alternative was watching a threat approach with no warning at all. After the ceremony, Marcus found her standing alone near a viewport, looking out at the stars beyond the outpost, stars that no longer felt quite as dangerous as they had 6 months earlier, hiding inside the belly of an enemy fleet that had hunted them without ever finding them. Federation Command wants to know if the Wraith is ready for another assignment, he said quietly. No pressure to answer today, but they're asking. Elena thought about the question for a long moment, about 6 years of war and 6 months of hiding, and the particular, hard-won knowledge that a single quiet ship, patient enough and careful enough, could still change the course of something as vast as a war between empires. Tell them yes, she said finally. Tell them the Darkship isn't finished yet. Somewhere far beyond the outpost, in the vast dark spaces between stars where the Wraith had learned to live and hide and listen, the war continued, and the ghost that the Dominion feared most, the one that had lived inside their own main fleet without ever being caught, was already beginning to think about where it needed to disappear to next.